Hey guys, Mike here with Nova 3 Labs for another episode of Ask Mike Anything. So I'm back answering your questions for round two. Okay, so here we go. I'll just jump right in with the questions that I got from Instagram and from Facebook. So there's actually one question from last time I do want to answer, and it was my buddy Jake asking about floating and isolation tanks and if I thought it was a worthwhile recovery modality. The answer is I don't know. I've never done it, and subsequently he ended up buying me a gift certificate to go try it out. I still haven't done it, so I can't give you an informed answer. I think it's probably a good idea. This is just based on anecdotal evidence of what I've heard from clients. I think it's worthwhile putting a valuable amount of time into recovery modalities to balance out how hard most athletes train. I'll leave it at that. That's all I can say for now. I haven't done it. I'm looking forward to doing it. I just need to find the time. All right, let's get into some questions. So Kevin asked, what are your thoughts on kombucha? Helpful for gut health or overrated fizz? How often is it helpful? When does it become too much? Homemade or store-bought difference? Really good question. So many moons ago, I had written an article called Kombucha, Superfood or Super Hype. So that blog post is on the Nova 3 Labs website blog. You just have to dig through and look for it. It's back January 7th. I give my thoughts in pretty detailed answer there, so I won't be long-winded on it. I do like his question on homemade or store-bought. That is where the difference lies, and that's where the devil is in the details. So I'll leave you hanging with that one. You guys go read that blog. You'll know my answer on that. To add a little bit to that, I do have a couple of clients who have told me that, yes, it really seems to make my guts feel good. And these are both clients. I have two clients who use it, who say, yeah, it seems to help. They have some GI issues. So anecdotally, it works. And my line of thinking is if something works for you and it makes you feel good, do it within reason, right? So, all right, moving on. I'm going to hammer a bunch of these out because I'm not going to be around for a while here, heading on vacation. Okay, so Trevor asked a really good question regarding gut health. We'll continue on this line of thought. Are there any tests that someone could take to determine the health of their gut and how well they absorb food? That's an awesome question. What are some foods or supplements that someone could take to improve gut health? That's a really freaking big question. Okay, so the first one, tests. Are there specific tests to test out your gut health? And specifically determine if you're absorbing your food. So yes, there's lots of functional medicine tests for GI health. You can get into GI permeability. You can test for parasites. You can test for H. pylori. You can test for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. All those give us some data back. Does it actually help the client? Maybe, maybe not. It really depends. You can really go down this testing rabbit hole and really not get any answers back. And that's coming from someone who administers tests to clients. You really, in my opinion, you really need to be particular with your testing. You don't just throw a ton of tests at someone and hope an answer comes back. You should be looking at that client saying this test fits these signs and symptoms that this client is having. Now, I know I'm not answering the question right now. Is there a test that determines how well someone absorbs food? As far as I know, no. Now, I don't have the whole plethora of tests available to me. What I would say is if you're looking for something like that, the company that probably does it the best would be Genova Diagnostics. They have a bazillion tests. I probably have a couple boxes back there from Genova, I do. And for different tests, and I've used them before. And when it comes to gut health, I would say, and I could go way off on a tangent here, I don't think I want to. You can really, it's like trying to diagnose a shoulder injury. That's what I always say to my clients. It's really hard. Shoulder injuries, massive range of motion, lots of different structures holding it together. It can be tough to pinpoint exactly what's going on. With gut health, it's very, very similar. It can be really, really hard to pinpoint the issue with that client. We deal with it first through food, lifestyle stressors, yada, yada, yada. Then we could get into some testing. I don't honestly use a lot of gut health testing very much. The main one I use is some some food sensitivity testing to determine, okay, what's the common offender here? Do we need to remove something from a diet? That's usually the easiest answer versus testing how well you're absorbing something. Trevor, if you had some specific questions, you know where to reach me. Shoot me an email for sure. That's a really good question. That's not a great answer that I just gave. But as far as I know, I don't think there's one that says, yes, if we eat 100 grams of broccoli, we're going to absorb this much, lycopene, lycopene's from tomatoes, whatever, from the broccoli, right? Sulforaphane. So, to my knowledge, there isn't a test like that. There are some tests out there that'll say, okay, you are deficient in X vitamin. This is what we recommend. I don't know if I put a lot of merit into those tests, unless you're really chronically deficient in something like magnesium or you're consuming too much of something. You really won't see an issue. Just my 2 cents on that. What about the second part to your question? What are some foods or supplements that someone could take to improve gut health? Okay, massive question. Really, really basic. You need a decent amount of fiber. You need a solid probiotic. I do think there's a lot of merit in almost everybody across the board supplementing with probiotics. Just from an immunity point of view, staving off upper respiratory infections in athletes, keeping your zonulin down. Zonulin is something that causes an increase in your GI permeability. When we intake gluten, we have an increase in zonulin. Zonulin increases our GI permeability. Probiotics combat that. Just for overall health, that's probably the number one. The biggest bang for your buck is you're going to get out of taking a probiotic in the long term. Specific foods, yeah, I mean, this is probably more of like Dr. Rhonda Patrick's realm, but you could go down the whole, fermented line of foods, offering a natural source of probiotics versus, let's say, something capsulated. That would always be beneficial. It's a big generalized question, so I can't really give a very specific answer to it. When it comes to gut health, as almost everything is in nutrition, it's really, really individual. I see some athletes crush ice cream and Chipotle every day. They seem to have an amazing amount of resilience. I see somebody who just looks at a piece of bread and next thing you know, they're blown up like the Michelin Man. So it's really, really dependent on your GI tolerance and if you need to do something with that. Like I said, you got some specific questions relating to yourself, shoot me an email. Next question up from somebody I don't know, goes by Lumberjack Poles. For the average athlete, do you take their job, manual labor versus someone who's sedentary, into consideration when prescribing macros? Awesome question. Yes, and what we're getting at here is either NEAT or NEPA. So NEAT would be non-exercise activity-induced thermogenesis or non-exercise physical activity. And both of those, so basically doing shit outside of training and burning calories, that's what it amounts to. Do I take that into consideration when I'm looking at, let's say, the first time I'm prescribing macros for a client? Yes and no. I'll ask a background. Okay, what do you do for training? How many times a week? What's your training look like? Send me an example. So I get an idea of how intensely someone's training, their volume, their frequency, their intensity. Outside of that, I don't usually adjust macros to relate for something like non-exercise physical activity until I see that it's having a major effect. As an example, previous client of mine, very good CrossFitter, also had a very intense manual labor job as a landscaper. So right away, we had to adjust his calories. He came into the consult knowing, I was like, okay, yes, I'm a 4,000 calorie guy, 145, 500 carbs, etc., etc. So his intake for his size was actually quite large. And as the labor that he did outside of training increased, his caloric intake would increase. This is just common sense. Another client I've had came into the consult, training like 5-6 times a week, calories, macros, everything's good, boom, boom, boom. All of a sudden starts doing a lot more construction related activity outside of training. Next thing you know, he's leaning out like crazy and hunger's gone through the roof. Well, then we need to compensate for that extra caloric expenditure. And that can be a I've talked a lot about this with clients lately. That can be a big one that makes a really big difference if somebody is able to lean out or not. There's lots of discussion around this about increasing training and how it will shut down your non-exercise activity induced thermogenesis. So basically people train really hard and then they go home and sit and do nothing. And it's more of just a discussion that's going on in the nutrition world right now. Whether or not it's true, I don't know, but it does make a big difference in your total caloric expenditure for the day. So just actually standing at a desk, or as stupid as it is, sitting on one of those Swiss balls as you're using a computer, that can actually increase your total caloric expenditure quite substantially. Now, for somebody who's just looking at performance, this is a non-issue, right? Other than that manual labor might cause some overtraining issues, right? And you have to have your downtime. For somebody looking for body composition changes, not so worried about performance, this can be a big deal, right? And this is where, from a personal point of view, I like that low intensity monostructural aerobic component probably in the fasted state. Obviously I'm very biased for that, for the stuff I've done in the past. That seems to work quite well. It doesn't add a ton of stress to that client's ability to recover and causes an increase in caloric expenditure. I know, once again, I'm off topic here, but do I consider that in the macro calculation? Not initially, not until I see what are those macros going to do for that person, and then I react to them by adjusting them. Hopefully that answers the question. Once again, a little bit long-winded. Okay, where am I at for time here? Okay, we're about 11 minutes in. I like to keep it about 10, but I'm going to answer one more question, because if I don't, she will come and seek me out. This is from Gwen. So Gwen says, I'm recovering from a shoulder surgery, so my training has changed to what can I do now category while in rehab. I get that. Generally, what changes need to be taking place in my nutrition and why, so I can stay lean and support healing? Okay, two different things there. Are there any differences for CrossFitters versus strength athletes? Okay, I'm not sure on the last part. Let me chew on that while I think about the first part. Okay, when somebody is injured, do we need to adjust their nutrition? Yes. So from not even considering a quality point of view, let's just assume, and I should never assume, but let's just assume that quality is really high. So that's really number one. So when somebody's injured, what the hell's going on? Let's just call it an injury. We won't even say anything specific. So they've got reduced caloric expenditure. They're probably going to have reduced hunger, but they're going to have, depending on the severity of injury, they're going to have an increase in their metabolic rate. So being injured can actually increase your metabolic rate by up to 20%. That's a huge amount. This is why the first thing you shouldn't do is dump your calories, right? That's the first thing you shouldn't do, especially if you're in the acute phase. You don't want to all of a sudden be taking away building blocks that your body's actively seeking while it's trying to recover from the injury. So the quality part should be high. Nutrient density, vitamins, minerals. I don't need to go into detail on that. Macro part. Do we reduce it? Maybe. Initially, I would say no. So for the first 3-4 days, let's keep that intake the same, and then see what can you do. What's your caloric expenditure like in and around training? What's your training intensity look like? I've had a lot of athletes who have gone through injuries, and the first thing they do want to do is hack away their carbs, hack away their calories, drop their fat into the toilet. Not the best thing to do, right? Because usually if they have a very good coach, they're going to be able to work around that injury and keep their activity level relatively high. When I've seen the altered programming from coaches to work around injuries, whether it's a knee, a hip, a shoulder, I look at it and go, holy, that's still a lot of work. Okay, and I'll ask, okay, where's your hunger at? Where's your soreness at? What are you able to do? So we really don't want to bottom it out. But that said, if you're in a place where you're really not doing, you're doing half the intensity and half the volume that you used to, yeah, you're going to have to adjust your numbers to reflect that. We don't want to get into a massive caloric excess and have an athlete put on a ton of weight. In my mind, and let's be clear on this, in my mind, that's actually not a bad thing. I know from an athlete's point of view that people lose their shit over putting on a couple pounds. That's actually very preservative for your hormones as you're going through an injury. I know it doesn't make sense. People are like, dude, I don't want to get fat. You know, I'm losing my abs. I totally understand that. But from a healing point of view, being in a caloric excess is very, very beneficial. I don't want to get into the specific foods of what we could go into based on the type of injury. Do you need a collagen supplement? Do you need something like Max Rehab? Woo, yes, new and released. I would say yes, but I don't want to get into specifics on the type of that. I mean, I would look at support supplements like that for sure, but that's sort of supplemental to nutrition, no pun intended. So staying lean and supporting healing is almost on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Almost. I would say you can still do it. Don't expect the rock solid leanness that you might have had when you were training really intensity if you become injured. There's going to be a level of localized inflammation and a level of systemic inflammation. There might be some water retention. Reduced activity is going to do that too. So just expect it. It's part of the process, part of the journey. You'll get that leanness back. It's not the be all end all. Any differences between CrossFitters and strength athletes for injuries? I don't know. My gut, my knee-jerk reaction is no. There isn't, right? We're still going to look at the same thing. We're still going to look at the programming, what type of injury, what were you doing with nutrition, what is it going to take to get over that injury. Honestly, between CrossFitter strength athletes, if we're talking ollie lifting, there's not a ton of difference other than one is very limited in the movements they do and the other one does a whole bunch of random shit all the time. So from my point of view, they're still both high functioning athletes that we need to take care of. So anyways, long-winded on what the hell day is it? Saturday? Sunday? I don't even know. I work tonight. Okay, anyways, thank you for your questions, guys. If you had any at any time you didn't want me to fire out on this sort of video format, you can just email me, text me, you know where to go get a hold of me, and I'll keep them coming as long as you guys want it. Okay, thanks very much. Bye.